by Merlin Burgland for the Library of Congress American Folklife Center Veterans History Project. Took place on the 2nd day of January 2005 at Riverdale, Nebraska. Well, John, you want to tell us about your experience in World War II, and you can start wherever you choose.
Well, I'll just start in high school. I graduated in 1939, but there was a lot of going on in Europe at that time, and we had a daily news discussion. The superintendent was very interested in this, so I was up on it, on what was going on. From high school, I went to University of Nebraska at Lincoln for 1 year. Run out of money, couldn't go any further, so I went and took a course in aircraft building, aluminum, and the Fry Aircraft Company in Omaha, Nebraska. From there, I went to California, got a job at Lockheed, and was building airplanes. First, I started out on the Lockheed Lodestar that they was changing over and called it the Hudson Bomber. The United States was lend-leasing this to England for submarine patrol in the North Sea. I was on the bomber project just a short time when they started another line building a P-38. And I went to that line, and we were building what was the part in the cell. That's the part the pilot set in. I was there 3 or 4 months building that. Had a little accident and got my head drilled. So rather than keep the driller and the drillee together, they transferred me to the experimental department. And there I was working on the XP-58, which was a huge version of a P-38.
Was this still going to be a fighter?
It was going to be a fighter.
Just a bigger version of it.
A much bigger version. It was powered by 2 inline engines of 7 cylinders, 6 rows, 42 cylinders. It was a whopper. It was huge. I'd never seen anything like it.
That would be 42 cylinders?
42 cylinder inline engine. It was huge. The whole plane was huge. The pilot straddled a cannon with fire between his legs. So, and it was supposed to be a long-range fighter for bomber escort. But one day the supervisor came around and said, "John, we can't get you any more deferments, so I guess you're going to have to go take the physical, and it's scheduled for the day after tomorrow." So I went to downtown, drove my bicycle downtown Los Angeles, took my physical, and from there I went straight over to the Air Force recruiting officer and tried to get in. He said, "I'm sorry, we don't have any openings here. You go back to Omaha where you came from and you can probably get in." So 2 days later I was on my way to Omaha. And just a short time after that I was in the Air Force as an aviation cadet. I was sworn in on the 25th of September 1942 in the old post office building in Omaha, downtown Omaha. One thing that was nice about the swearing in is we were sitting on benches along the hallway, both sides. I don't know how many there was. There must have been 100 of us there. And I kept looking right across at a fella, and he looked familiar. but I couldn't place him. When they called the goal a short time later, they said, Dietz, Deterding. And when they said Dietz, I knew who he was. I went to grade school with him. He was about first grade, and I was in about the fifth grade. I hadn't seen him from when I left that school in the sixth grade. I left that school to go to another school, and I hadn't seen him till this day. But anyhow, we went through training together. We're roommates, a lot of it. We were shipped to Santa. I was put on 6 months leave, or indefinite leave, because they didn't have any place to train us. There were so many volunteers, and all the training bases were full, so they put us on indefinite leave. And while I was on that leave, I went to work for Martin Company in Omaha. About 5 months later, got my call to go to Leavenworth, no, not Leavenworth, Shepherd Field, Texas, for my basic training. We all took a train ride down there. Before our basic was up, we were shipped to Santa Ana, California, where we started basic training over again. And before we finished it there, we were shipped to Sioux City, Iowa for CTD, where we were there for about 3 or 4 months. I think it was about 4 months, college training, and it was mostly book courses and a lot of calisthenics and training. From the Sioux City, I went back to Santa Ana, where we were split up in small groups. My group went to Thunderbird Field number 2 in Phoenix, Arizona for basic flight training. I finished basic. We went on to, it was primary flight training at Phoenix. Then we went to Bakersfield, California for basic training in the multi-vibrator, BT-13. Bob Dietz and I were roommates most of the time. We were split up at for advanced training. Bob went to fighter training, and I went to bomber training at Shepherd Field, Texas. I completed my training there, promoted, got my second lieutenant bars on, oh boy, can't remember just exactly when it was, 30th of June, 1944. That's what it was. We were sent home on a leave, 10 days leave of absence, and we're to report to Roswell, New Mexico for B-17 transition. The 10 days I was home, I met my future wife. Went home. From home I went to Roswell and was assigned to an instructor who had completed his missions in Europe in the B-17. And the first thing he said, I've done my duty already. They've given me 5 cadets to train. We're going for a test ride. And when we come back, there will be 2 of these left. I will concentrate on 2. After about 5 minutes in the seat on that test ride, I was one of the ones that was the 3 that was eliminated. I didn't have to go to any classes or anything, but I was going to be there till the class shipped out. So I did go to all the ground school classes, and when we shipped out to Lincoln, Nebraska airfield for making up crews, we got there, and as soon as one of the fellows that I went through training with at Roswell, and knew I went through all the schools and everything. He said, "You want to be my co-pilot?" And I said, "Sure." Johnny Banks was the fellow's name. We'd got acquainted while we were close to in the same barracks, I guess, probably down there, because he was a B and I was a D. We were always alphabetical. So I was we were at Lincoln for quite some time. All we had to do while we was at Lincoln was see the board in the morning. If our name wasn't on it, we had the rest of the day off.
That'd be Lincoln, Nebraska.
Lincoln, Nebraska. And so I'd get on the train after I read the bulletin board by 8 o'clock or so in the morning and go to Council Bluffs, where my folks live, and Mom had bought a set of kitchen cabinets from Montgomery Ward and don't know how she was going to get them up, so I started installing them. Well, it so happened that this young lady that was living there had my room. Mom had taken in boarders because so many people working at the bomber plant there in Omaha, and my future wife happened to be one of these boarders. Well, it wasn't long as I met her, and we were going out evenings, and I was building cabinets at daytime. About 11 o'clock, I'd head back to Lincoln on the train, and 8 o'clock next morning, I was heading back to Council Bluffs. But anyhow, we finally were shipped, our crew was shipped to Sioux City for transition, overseas transition. We were flying B-17s, overseas training. We had our gunnery practice, all the things it took to learn to be a crew to fly that airplane.
And what plane was this, John?
This is a B-17. B-17D probably. They used any old airplanes for training, and then the last few days of training we did get into the B-17Es, which were the ones they were using for actually sending on the bombing missions. Well, we was on the missions training there. I got sick, what they call lover's disease. And they slapped me in the hospital. I'd been married 6 days, and I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. What the devil's the name of it? They call it lover's disease. Anyhow, they didn't know what the cure. There was no cure for it, and there still isn't to this day, except bed rest. So I was in bed there. My wife had come out and see me every day. The days, 3 weeks in the hospital, and what a boring time it was. But anyhow, when I got out, the only thing they did to treat it was give me sulfa, and the sulfa took away my depth perception. So I was grounded for a while, and when I went back on flying duty, of course, the crew that I was on, they had replaced me with another co-pilot because they couldn't wait on me, so I was without a crew. So I flew the test hop, one of the co-pilots in test hop for quite some time. And one morning there was a message for me to report to such and such a place. I was being placed on another crew as a co-pilot. The co-pilot on this crew that I replaced him with suddenly went blind, totally blind overnight, and I was his replacement. I never heard how he came out or anything, but anyhow, this was Lieutenant Few's crew. I got into it, the training, pretty well toward the end of the training period. But anyhow, we finished our training there and went overseas. Must have been March or so of 45. 45, 1945. We were sent to a replacement depot where our crew was sent to, from there we went to the 306 Bomb Group for the 68th Squadron as a replacement crew.
Was this in North Africa?
No, this was in England.
In England.
In England. Thurlow, England. The 306 was the first group from the United States to go to England for the war. The beginning of the United States was at the war, in the war. So I was just an old group. But anyhow, they didn't need a whole crew, so our crew was pretty much broken up, and we all flew as replacements as some of the fellows were finishing their missions and were sent home, and we would be replacements for those on different crews. Actually, I only got on one bombing mission. We bombed Plattling, Germany. Don't remember the date, but anyhow, it was right toward the end of the war. We sat on the end of the runway many, many mornings, loaded, ready to go. But there had been an unfortunate happening where we bombed our own troops once because the Army was advancing so fast they couldn't keep track of them. So the reason we sat on the end of the runway ready to go was they was not sending us unless they knew exactly where our troops were. So there's day after day after day we sat on the end of the runway all loaded, ready to go, and we'd see the red, get ready to just unload the bombers completely, get ready for the next day. And it was the same thing over and over. So I actually only got on the one mission. It was a long mission. I think it was about 8 hours. Plattling, Germany. Was way down in southeast Germany and Austria part. We bombed a railroad marshalling yard. And sometime later, after the war, they said it was one of the most perfect bombing patterns that they had pictures of. I guess we really tore up that marshalling yard, but it was pretty late in the war. There was a big celebration, of course, when E-Day came. I immediately tried to get into the B-29 program, but of course the Army had different plans. Our group was assigned to what they call Casey Jones. Casey Jones was a project to photomap strategic Europe and North Africa from 20,000 feet. We put cameras in the radio compartment of the B-17, stripped all the armor, all the turrets, all the guns, everything out that we could so we could fly long-range missions. And what we did, we started flying out of England, and we had lines drawn on a map. We had to follow those lines from 20,000 feet in the air, plus or minus 100 feet, with a wing tip of no more than 1 degree, and we had to have a constant ground speed. So it was very, very precision flying. The autopilot would not fly it. We could fly it manually for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we would turn it over to the other pilot and go back and forth because it was so tense. And trying to keep the wings level, the navigator and bombardier worked as a team. The bombardier used the northern bomb sight to keep us on the line. He would sight a point and then sight ahead and keep us on that line. We couldn't be more than a mile off one side or the other of that line, or we'd be going back the next day to take pictures over. And the navigator kept track of the ground speed, and he would call out, "Ready, take," or some such as that for the toggler or the fellow that tripped the camera to take the picture. And we did this many a times at 1,000-mile line.
So you'd be photographing a strip of land.
We would be photographing this line, so that took pictures of it, wide picture. And when they take, and every picture overlapped the other pictures 60%. So they could take these pictures and put them in a machine they had, and they could tell the height of a tree, they told us, within about 6 inches from it. It was very, very precision. A lot of pictures taken. It was one flight, I remember we were over Italy from England on this flight, and we lost the engine. Oil pressure line broke, and we had to feather one of the engines, so we immediately headed back to England, and we made it on free without any problem.
But you couldn't photograph on TV.
Well, we didn't photograph on the way back with only 3 engines. So that was our orders. If we lost an engine, we were to return to base. But we was over Italy at the time. We flew over the Alps in Switzerland. I don't know whether we were supposed to or not, but we didn't pay much attention to what they said. They didn't have either them or the Spanish or the Portuguese or any of them. We didn't pay attention to what they told us we could do or not. We did it. We were working. Of course, we were Big Daddy then. But anyhow, eventually our group was shipped to the Rock of Gibraltar, where we were to photograph North Africa, Spain, and Portugal. And we flew out of there. We were guests of the British, the one runway at the Rock, and it started in the water and ended in the water. So if you missed the runway, you went for a swim. The one fellow I went overseas with came in too short one day and took his tail wheel off on the end of the runway. So it was, and the prevailing wind was from the east to the west. And we could always tell the direction of the wind because there was a halo from the top of the rock, just a cloud hanging off toward the east. As the wind would come up from the east, from the west, it'd rise up and go and cool enough that had that cloud there. And if you ever looked at the pictures of the Rock of Gibraltar, there was a big white deal on the east side. Well, that's what that little big white deal was. It was catching rainwater out of that cloud, and that's where Gibraltar got most of their water. On the base there, we had to bathe in salt water, and we had about a half a minute we could jump under the clear water shower and wash the salt water off. We were eating in the English mess, which wasn't very good, I guess, according to our American standards. So we did a lot of eating downtown. The navigator and I would go down, and his favorite was Cite and eggs. He was from Texas. So he was actually from Baltimore, but he'd been in Texas enough that he got that kind of Texas drawl, Cite and eggs. Well, I think it was camel steak probably, and I don't know whether it was seagull eggs or what, but anyhow, it tasted better than what we were eating in the British mess hall. But eventually, we had so many people get sick that they shipped us out to Port Leone, North Africa, which was about 45-minute flight from Gibraltar to Port Leone. Navy base that had been owned and operated by the Vichy French, and it was a landing point in the North African invasion. There was a pretty good-sized cemetery out there where a number of Americans had died and were killed in that invasion, and were in that cemetery. We flew out of Port Leone for quite some time. It was really beautiful duty living on the Navy base, but there again we were guests of the Navy, and we got our airplanes serviced by their gasoline trucks, and only after the Navies were done. So we were quite a disadvantage. And one day I was sent from Port Leone to Casablanca on some kind of a lasting deal. And as I came back, I noticed there was a huge pile of what looked like B-17 engines there. And I came back, I talked to CO, and I said, boy, I said, we've got a lot of bad engines. We were having problems, had to do our own maintenance, because we had a lot of engines that had 1,000 hours on them. And they usually changed out at 500 hours. But anyhow, I told him about this, and he said, well, he says, I know they're there, but he says, we can't get them. He says, I'm going to give you the job of see if you can get them. And so the next day I took a Jeep with another fella, went down and talked to the man that was at the guard gate there and told him our situation, what it was. And he says, you know, this stuff all goes to the French. And they'll pay for it if and when they can. But he said, you know, just between you and me, I doubt if they'll ever pay for it. Well, I said, I doubt if they will either, but I said, we could sure use some of those engines. And he says, oh, I'll tell you what. He said, you just go get you a truck. And they had everything there. They had trucks. They had cars, anywhere from Jeeps to 6x6s to gasoline transports. They had everything there. He said, you just get you a truck, load up how many engines you want, and when you go through the gate, he says, I won't be there. He said, just keep going. And
were these engines crated?
they're all crated. Brand new engines, all crated.
Oh, my.
And so I didn't take anything that day. All I took that day was a command car. I don't know what it was. It was a Ford, all painted in the gray color of the Army. And I went back to the base, and I looked up the CO, and I said, I got something outside here. I walked outside, I said, here's the keys to that command car. What? Yep. I said, we can get all the engines we want, or anything else we want. He said, you're the transportation officer from now. So that was my main duty at that time at Port Leone. We went down. I got a big flatbed truck. We loaded a bunch of engines onto it. We took them up to Port Leone, and we started changing engines out. And any time we had much problems with an engine, we just slap a new one in. I also brought up gasoline trucks, 6x6s, 4x4s, more Jeeps. We were really outfitted. And when I left to come home, there was well over $1 million worth of equipment I signed over to the next man. I don't know whatever happened to it. That wasn't my problem. I signed it over, and that was his problem. But while I was there, how much time is it?
We're okay. Okay, you have about 20 minutes.
While I was there, we had a number of experiences other than just the maintenance problems. We had problems with the Arabs coming across the river there and stealing a lot of stuff. And somehow or other, intelligence got a hold that they was going to pull a big raid, and we didn't know what it was about or anything, but they had a lot of dory, small boats on the other side of the river, and they was going to pull a raid one night. So the base went on full alert, and we were told to go check out whatever guns we could. Everything had been checked into the provost marshal, supposedly. The 450 caliber machine guns that were going to pull a big raid of some kind. That was through our intelligence, the Navy intelligence and that. And all of the guns have been taken off of everything, including the patrol boats. And so we had some shotguns, about all we had. So we started, but you'd be surprised, even though all the guns have been supposed to be turned into the provost marshal, you'd be surprised how many guns came out of hiding that night. Everybody had 2 or 3 souvenir weapons. I had a 32 automatic, Walther automatic that I'd got a hold of as a souvenir, and I had a shotgun from the, we used to go duck hunting. All we had was buckshot and skeet shot. So we loaded them with buckshot, and we patrolled the river that night with a Jeep. I was in one of the Jeeps as a driver, and we had another fellow with a shotgun, and 2 shotguns, and there was others. We patrolled for an hour or so, and then we trade off. But the raid never did come off. But the thing that surprised the most of us is how many guns came out that night. We never heard any more about any of the raids, any more raids or anything. But at one time, they did get came into the base at night, and they filed some of the control cables in one of the B-17s. And in our pre-flight check, we found it. Luckily, we found it because had we have taken off, the airplane would have crashed when the cable severed. That was the only thing. Another thing was one of the guys that was living here on the base didn't get along with anybody very well, and he was in one of the Quonsets by himself. And he always slept with a P-38, which was another German gun, under his pillow. And he let everybody know that he did because he wasn't going to be robbed. So one morning he came out, and all he had on was these shorts. And he says, "Somebody come in here last night and took everything." And he was really razzed because he was the one that slept with the P-38 under his pillow, and they had taken all the mattress covers off, and all the Arabs needed to do with those mattress covers was cut 2 armholes and a head hole, and they had a uniform that they wore. And you've seen those mattress covers all over in town. But anyhow, they even took the mattress covers off all the beds except the one he was sleeping in. But I finally got my orders. They were asking for volunteers to stay because so many fellows their time was getting ready to come home. And I told them I'd stay if they'd get me my promotion. Well, I was long overdue I had been in grade for about 2 years. And the CO says, if you'll stay, we'll get you your promotion. Well, the reason I was going to stay is my wife is Swedish heritage. And a lot of her people lived in Stockholm. And that's where we were to go from Port Leode to Stockholm, Sweden, to do the mapping of Sweden and Finland and up there. And so I figured if I stayed, I'd just have her come over to visit her relatives, and she'd be there with me. Well, anyhow, my number came up a couple months later. I hadn't get my promotion, and I went to the CO, and he says, well, I put it in. He says, I almost bet you'd get it, but he says, if I was you, I wouldn't bank on it. Well, I said, I think I'll go home then. And so a few days later, I was with the whole group. We were using the B-17s that we had for transport to go to Istria, France, where we were to board a train for Camp Lucky Strike on our way home. Well, I was just back there in the back end, and pilot was sitting up front. Pretty soon I heard him holler, "John, come up here. You get that co-pilot seat." That was my last flight. The fellow that was supposed to fly co-pilot couldn't walk onto the plane. He was so drunk. So I told the other guys, keep him in the back here, and I flew co-pilot. So that was my last official flight while I was overseas. Was from Port Leone in North Africa to Essieux, France, on the way home. I went to Camp Lucky Strike. I knew my brother-in-law was there doing guard duty, so I looked him up. Had a nice visit with him. Nice surprise when the second lieutenant walked into his tent. A bunch of GIs there, and you should have seen them pop to attention. But anyhow, while I was at Camp Lucky Strike, they issued us our blankets, and the way they were issued is somebody was going home and they turned them in, and we got them issued right back to us, no wash or anything, and I got a real nice case of scabies.
Oh, wow.
And so went on sick call, got a bunch of pink stuff that we had to rub all over us, and I was scratching from there till halfway home on the boat. And finally got rid of the scabies. Got home, was at Camp Kilmer, New Jersey for 3 or 4 days processing, and while they were processing one day, they told us we could go anywhere we wanted to go. So another fellow and I took off and went to Washington, D.C. We went to the Senate building, and while we were visiting the Senate building, they were discussing flight pay. Of course, I was a second lieutenant drawing flight pay, which was 50% of above second lieutenant pay, and there was nobody on the floor. He was talking into a microphone, and it was quite interesting. We didn't get to talk, though. They had a big screen between us and down there. But anyhow, that was my first trip to Washington, D.C. We went from there, went back to Camp Kilmer, shipped to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, to be mustered out. That was one of my lucky days. I went to go to be mustered out, and who should be sitting there to muster me out was one of my friends from CTD. We formed what we called a Daubers Club. The Daubers was the dauber we used to put shoe polish on our shoes. And he went down through the record and said, "John, I see you haven't ever finished your basics." He said, "I'm afraid you're going to have to, before you can get out." "Oh, no." He said, "Well, you know," he says, "you've been through it. I think you know it all." And he checked it off, and I got to go home. I guess that was the end of my service. I tried to stay my wife was living in Denver at the time. I tried to stay in the reserves. We had meetings, not much to do, mostly just horsing around. I got tired of that and quit. That was the end of my Army career. I went to school under the GI Bill, learned to be a cabinet maker, and I carried that trade through from about 1946, different phases of it. Carpenter built houses. We now own a store in Kearney, 2 stores in Kearney and one in Grand Island, where we sell spas, hot spring spas, all kinds of wood stoves, gas stoves, lights, all the chemicals. We have a fairly successful business. I've turned it over to my son now. I retired about a little over 9 years ago, but I haven't got around to quitting yet. I'm I don't know, I just can't make up my mind, I guess.
John, what was the date that you was mustered out then?
It was right close to the end of August in 42 to 46, 1946. I don't remember the exact date, but just a few days short of 4 years I was in. One thing I'm doing now, I'm building a memorial to all the veterans from all the wars on the side of our building. I have Nebraska completed. It is about 20 feet long, 8 foot high, covered completely with white stone that I mined in Wyoming. The border of black stone that was South Dakota. And on right in the center of Nebraska it says, "Thanks, Vets." I now have a addition that I'm going to put onto it. I have a planter. It's 10 foot by 12 foot, 3-tiered planter that will be the same height as the planter that Nebraska sits on. And on the wall behind will be a cross, about 10 inches wide, 14 foot tall, made out of the black stone. Under the right-hand arm will be the 10 Commandments carved in a piece of Colorado flagstone, red flagstone, about 3 inches thick, 4'4" by 6'6" high. Under the left-hand arm of the cross will be the 5 service emblems in bronze. The fascia of the building will be raised about 4 foot. In the background there will all be white stone, but right above Nebraska will be "May God Bless America" in the black stone, in the same size as "Thanks, Vets." This is my tribute to all the vets of all the wars that the United States have been in. I feel that World War II was a necessary war. It cost us many, many thousands of lives. But had it not been for that war, we would either be speaking German or Japanese if we were alive. I doubt that I would have survived because they wouldn't have been able to come as long as I had life. I support our veterans organizations, American Legion, life member of the VFW. And I got sick this last summer and wasn't able to complete that memorial, but I hope to have it done now by the next Veterans Day, November 2005.
John, what was the opinion of the Russians and the policy that was prevalent then?
Well, we all thought over there that now that we've got the Germans, we just well go right on through Russia and get that taken care of. It didn't prevail. Patton was ready to go, but somebody said no. As it turned out, it cost us a long Cold War. The Russians, I guess, are our friends now. I don't know how that would have come out, but I don't think there was much resistance left in the Russian people. They did. I'm going to make a little postscript here. One of the most memorable flights I made in all my career was soon after the war. We were told to make a maximum effort. Absolutely nothing on the plane that wasn't necessary. We put in Bombay tanks, and we were going to go liberate some of our POWs. We didn't know where we were going, but we found out when we got there that we were up in either Estonia or Latvia, and brought home a bunch of the American flight personnel that had been shot down. I never saw such a happy group as they crowded onto the plane. That day, we flew from Thurlow, England, up to whatever it was, Latvia or Estonia, Stalag Luft number 3. From there, we never shut the engines off. We flew to a port airplane drome right outside of Paris, unloaded, and went back to England, and barely had enough gas left to land.
So you took the liberated prisoners then to, where did you land with them?
We landed at just outside of Paris, where they were sent to a hospital, examined, and sent home. Those fellows, every one of them wanted to get up in that cockpit. Most of them were pilots or co-pilots, and they wanted to get up in that cockpit and fly that plane.
Is that right?
But we had to keep them back in the back.
Well, that's a real interesting story, John. Thank you for your time, and that completes us. John Deterding is a narrator of this tape.